Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in my series of March of the Machine Commander deck techs. I'm covering every legendary creature from March of the Machine's main set in no particular order, plus the extra legends from Mom Jumpstart, the special pre-release promos, and if there's interest, maybe even the non-face legends from the Mom Commander products. So if you have a request for a March of the Machine Commander you'd like to see me build, or a way you want to see me build them, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today our commander is Glissa, Herald of Predation, formerly a Viridian elf from the plane of Mirrodin, which became New Phyrexia. Unlike some of the commanders in this series, Glissa has a lot of lore behind her, being the main character of the Mirrodin cycle of novels from 2003 and 2004. The heroic role she took on in those novels, and the original Mirrodin block, fell away, however, during the Scars of Mirrodin block about 8 years later. Her newly villainous role only deepened in the intervening time, and we see her here in her completed form, serving as Vorinclex's steward and second. What makes a redemption story so rare and satisfying is that most of the time, a character's development goes in the opposite direction. Sorry, Glissa. I'm excited to show you what I put together for Glissa, but before we get started, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why it's such a cool card and why I put it at the head of my deck. So 30 cards go toward doing whatever it wants me to do. That's our game plan. It's what we do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go toward supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction pieces. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers, sometimes more if it would play into the game plan, sometimes none at all, but I almost always keep to my floor of 38 lands, so I can make sure I always hit my land drops and I can cast my spells, and play commander. So let's talk about our commander. Glissa, Herald of Predation is a 3/5 legendary Phyrexian zombie elf for 3, a black, and a green. She only has one ability, but it's a big one. At the beginning of combat on our turn, we choose 1. We either incubate 2 twice, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We transform all incubator tokens we control. Again, I'll talk about it in a moment. Give me a moment. Or all of our Phyrexians gain first strike and death touch until end of turn. So let's first talk about what incubate is. The idea behind incubate is we make an incubator token, which looks like this. We then incubate in, which in this case is 2, and we do it twice. That means we're going to be making 2 of these tokens and putting 2 +1/+1 counters on each of them. These are just artifacts, and so the +1/+1 counters don't do anything until we pay 2 here to transform them, which flips them into 0/0 Phyrexian artifact creature tokens. So that means now, since they had 2 1/1 counters on them and they were just artifacts, once we transform them for that 2 mana, they're 2/2 creatures. So we're sort of making 2 2/2s on layaway with Glissa's first mode. But notice that we can do this transformation at any time, at instant speed. We don't have to do it at sorcery speed. Pretty good. Or her second mode is we can transform all of our incubator tokens. So we don't actually have to pay that 2 mana to flip it over. We can just let our commander do it for us. So pretty nice. Pretty fun to be able to incubate 2 twice, several times, and then transform all of our incubators if that's what we wanted to do. And then once they have flipped over, they are Phyrexians, so that third mode would give them first strike and death touch. Pretty good. So as I'm sure you have guessed, we're built around this ability. We can make incubator tokens, we can transform our tokens into freshly hatched Phyrexians, or we can give our Phyrexians a kind of evasion, since the combination of death touch and first strike means they'll probably kill their blockers without having to trade, and who wants that? So our opponents might just let us buy. The first mode is good, and the second is essentially a follow-up to the first, but it's that last one, this one right here, that things start to shine in. So this deck is a Phyrexians typal deck. But unlike my Elish Norn March of the Machine deck, linked in the video's description, this one focuses less on the broad typal synergies and more on the core mechanical identity of Phyrexia: poison counters. That's right, it's not an infect deck per se, but it's a little close. Okay, we do have a couple of infect cards, but we're mostly focused on the toxic mechanic, which I'll talk about once we get to those creatures. More to the point, our typal synergies are all right here on our commander. Glissa wants us to have Phyrexians, so she makes some for us. If we already have some, great, we're swinging in with them. And like I said, a combination of first strike and death touch offers our opponents a hard choice. Lose your creatures or lose your life total. Only with the poison we're slinging, it's more like lose your creatures or lose the game. As usual with a poison deck, we're also running a number of Proliferate cards. These work well with the sometimes small amounts of toxic damage we can get through, but they also work well with other kinds of counters that our creatures might have. Usually +1/+1 counters, but sometimes oil counters. Remember those? Oil is a bit of a motif when it comes to Phyrexia. We also have a few fun artifacts with relevant counters too, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. The deck is a little funny on its mana curve. Our 5-mana commander comes down and starts giving us value that same turn with her triggered ability, but we want to have a few Phyrexians in play by then, or at least the ability to play out the rest of our hand. That's why 30 cards in this deck are mana value 2 or less, so we can try to use our glistening oil to grease the wheels of our game plan and build out our board fast. Actually, that's not a bad description of how this deck feels to play. It's quick and reckless, racing to develop board presence as fast as possible, and hopefully we can tag our opponents with some poison damage in the process. Then Glissa arrives, and we hit the NOS, blasting out more creatures while the ones we already have get their pseudo-evasive ability combo. We're a little behind, sometimes, and then Glissa offers us a couple of eggs in our trying time, and transforms them the next turn, but we're likely to pay to transform them ourselves. We want her third ability, or her third mode on her ability, because it means getting in and clawing our way up to 10 poison per player, one little glass bead at a time. Again, this isn't an infect deck, so it doesn't play as top-heavy as they often do. That said, your fellow players may not care. They'll learn we want to win with poison, and they'll ally with each other, turning their ire toward us, so they don't have to think about another axis of defeat. And that's fine with us. It means they're cutting into our life total of 40, while we just try to push into each of them to get up to 10. Or they're holding their creatures back for defense, and we're first death strike touching our way through them. Yes, it's not unlikely for us to get knocked out first because of our strategy and the way that other commander players see it, but that just means we have to be mindful in addition to fast. We make intentional plays, trading our creatures when we need to, because we know they'll emerge from the Ichor again thanks to our recursion spells. We pick and choose our battles, finding ways to slip through defenses with other kinds of oily evasion. We can beat 3 opponents at once, with poison, as long as we're willing to beat our wings hard, not worry how close we get to the sun, and trust that we'll be joined in our inevitable plummet by the rest of our pod. Our patience pays off when our glistening army toxifies our last opponent, but it's always a gamble, so we tread lightly. As we say to our creatures, careful, Ichorous. Forgive me, I thought it was clever. Anyway, you'll enjoy this deck if you like striving for the alternative win condition of poison over life loss, even just as a change of pace. Or if you like the vibe of New Phyrexia's black and green spheres, slick and oily metal and flesh coming together in a foul agglomeration that spells death for all who oppose it. So as usual, this Moxfield list we're going over today is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of it, you will see a considering section full of cards that I wanted to put in the deck initially and had to cut because it didn't work with the exact game plan I'm going with. But if you have a bigger budget or a smaller one, if you have a different aim you want to go with, or if you like what I've done and want to tweak it in small ways or large, that considering section is a great place to start when you build your own Glissa Herald of Predation deck. So we're going to start with the thing that Glissa cares about most. Phyrexians. We've got 30 of them, so let's talk about them. Venerated Rot Priest. If you remember this from Standard, it was annoying, but now it's only $1. It is a single green for a 1/2 Phyrexian Druid with Toxic 1. Let's talk about Toxic. Whenever the Rot Priest does damage to an opponent, combat damage that is, they get a number of poison counters equal to its toxic value. If it somehow gets toxic from multiple sources, it gets a total amount of, it gives that player a total amount of poison damage equal to the total toxic numbers it has on it. This is not a triggered ability. It's not like a sabotage ability where it goes on the stack when it does the damage and then it has to resolve. This is sort of like lifelink in a way. The damage is happening and the toxic is happening, and they happen at the same time. So Venerated Rot Priest does damage to an opponent, they're going to take a single point of combat damage, but also gain a single poison counter because it has Toxic 1. If it had Toxic 4, they would take a single point of combat damage and 4 poison counters, because that's how the Toxic mechanic works. Clear? Well, I'm asking, I know you can't answer me here, but trust me, it's not that bad. So, a 1/2 for a single green with Toxic 1 that also says whenever a creature we control becomes the target of a spell, target opponent gets a poison counter. So Venerated Rot Priest lets us pass out poison counters whenever any of our creatures are targeted by spells. whether that's our spells or our opponent's spells. So this is very nice for us to be able to hand out extra poison counters, either to get one opponent poisoned at all, so they have their first poison counter, so we can start building that up with things like Proliferate, or to push them to 3 poison counters, so that our corrupted mechanic, which cares about the number of opponents who have 3 or more poison counters, can get more power from it. Or sometimes that gets us our 10th poison counter on someone. Venerated Rot Priest definitely punches above its weight in a deck like this. Next up, a card that I really love. I played a mono green deck while this was in standard, and this did so much work for me. Armored Scrapgorger is 1 and a green for an 0/3 Phyrexian beast that gets +3/+0 as long as it has 3 or more oil counters on it. Now, oil counters, unlike poison counters, don't have an inherent mechanical meaning. They're just used by the cards that refer to them. So the Scrapgorger is a 1 and a green 0/3 that taps for 1 mana of any color, pretty good for us. And when it becomes tapped, whether it's for that color or for attacking or any other reason, we exile a target card from a graveyard and put an oil counter on the Scrapgorger. If, when it becomes tapped, there are no cards in any graveyards, then we can't exile something, so we don't put an oil counter on it. We've got to do all of this. If there's no target, then we don't get the oil counter, just so you know. But eventually, it's going to have at least 3 oil counters, and it'll become a 3/3. So that's nice for us. Usually it's just going to be a mana dork in this deck, but having an 0/3 that becomes a 3/3, not too bad. Next is Blightbelly Rat. 1 and a black for a 2/2 Phyrexian rat with Toxic 1, and when it dies, we Proliferate. So if you haven't seen Proliferate, or you need a reminder, Proliferate means you choose any number of permanents and or players, and then whatever kinds of counters each of those permanents and players have on them, they get 1 more of each of them. We don't get to say, oh, here's a player that has poison counters and experience counters, we only want to proliferate the poison counters. It's either all the counters on that player, they get 1 more of each kind, or they get no more of all the kinds. The same would be true if, maybe a creature had an oil counter and a -1/-1 counter. If we proliferate on that creature, it's going to get 1 more oil counter and 1 more -1/-1 counter. So it doesn't usually come up, but important to know how Proliferate works. So our rat hopefully gets some poison into our opponents, and when it dies, it gets some more by proliferating what was already there. Cankerbloom is next. This is a great card. 1 and a green for a 3/2 Phyrexian fungus. So it's 2 mana for a 3/2. That's already good. But if we pay 1 and sack it, we can either destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or proliferate. So it's a naturalize on a stick. It's one of these, but we can also use it for proliferation, which is pretty good. Grafted Butcher is next. 1 and a black for a 2/2 Phyrexian samurai that when it enters, all of our Phyrexians get menace until end of turn. Pretty sweet. And all the time, it gives all of our Phyrexians a lord effect of giving them +1/+1. We can also pay 3 and a black and sacrifice an artifact or creature while this is in the graveyard to return it from the graveyard to the battlefield, but only at sorcery speed. So this is a little bit of an outlet for us. If we have some incubator tokens that Glissa has made, and we haven't gotten a chance to flip them yet, either by paying to do so or with Glissa, we can just sacrifice those, since they are artifacts, even when they're not creatures, and use them to bring our Grafted Butcher back. Pretty good. And remember, when it comes back, it will enter the battlefield, and all of our Phyrexians will get menace. Evasion is so powerful in this deck, it's worth doing this over and over. Mere Convert is next. 2 generic mana for a 2/1 artifact creature Phyrexian Mirror. It has Toxic 1, and if we tap it and pay 2 life, we can add 1 mana of any color. So this doesn't feel great, losing 2 life just to get a mana, but if you need to fix your mana in that moment, and you're just 1 mana shy of something, think of it like you're paying Phyrexian mana. You're paying the 2 life rather than the mana, and it makes it not just thematic, but it helps. This is a way of having a mana dork that does hurt us, but gives us exactly what we need when we need it. Pestilent Siphoner is next. 1 and a black for a 1/1 flying Phyrexian insect with Toxic 1. It's just a 1/1 flyer with Toxic 1 for 2 mana. That's okay. Yeah. Sometimes flying is all you need in order to get a little bit of poison going. Next, from the Lorwyn Eclipsed Commander product, which just came out at the time of this recording, Springleaf Parade is X and double green for an enchantment that when it enters, we make X 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature tokens with Changeling, which means they are every creature type, which means in our deck, all we care about is the fact that they're Phyrexians. And it says creature tokens we control have tap to add 1 mana of any color. We don't have a whole lot of ways of making creature tokens, except for the fact that Glissa makes incubator tokens. And either she can flip them over or we can pay to do so. And when that happens, what we're doing is we're paying 1 mana to make an artifact into a 2/2 that taps for mana, thanks to Springleaf Parade. So it's sort of like we get a repeatable mana dork, or since it's 2 mana, sort of like a repeatable, I don't know, rampant growth effect in a way, even though that creature is not coming in tapped, and it's not a land, etc. So yeah, plus Springleaf Parade, if we don't want to just spend 2 green just to get this ability, we can add a little bit more and get a bunch of shapeshifters, which add to our Phyrexian count. Next is Bloated Contaminator. 2 and a green for a 4/4 Phyrexian beast with trample and with Toxic 1. So tramples over, toxic, for as long as it does 1 damage to a player, that player is also going to get a poison counter. Also worth noting how trample, first strike, and death touch work together. So first strike and death touch already mean the creature is going to do damage to the defending creature before regular damage time. So if that defending creature doesn't have first strike or double strike, they're going to take lethal damage, because any amount of damage dealt by a death touching creature is lethal, before they get a chance to do regular damage back to our creature, so our creature is likely to live. With trample means any amount of damage that our creature would do in excess of lethal damage tramples over. So right now it's a 4/4. Let's say they block with a 3/3. Lethal damage is 3 because the creature's toughness, the defending creature's toughness, is 3, so 1 point will trample over. But if this is attacking after Glissa's ability has triggered, and we've chosen all of our Phyrexians to get First Strike and Death Touch, then Bloated Contaminator is going to do 4 damage to the defending creature, 1 of which is lethal, because it's Death Touch damage, and any non-zero amount of damage from a Death Toucher is lethal. So Bloated Contaminator will do 1 damage to the defending creature and trample over the other 4, assuming it's just blocked by 1 creature. And because of First Strike, it's going to do all that prior to any kind of regular damage, like regular strike damage. So it'll kill a creature, trample over, do its toxic damage to our opponent, and then regular damage happens. If there's any creatures left at that point, probably aren't. So yeah, nice. Also, it says when this creature deals combat damage to a player, Proliferate. Unlike Toxic, which happens at the same time as damage, as combat damage, this is a triggered ability. So First Strike damage happens, assuming we've got Glissa going on with this. It does its Death Touch damage to whatever's blocking it and tramples over. As long as it does at least 1 point of combat damage to a player, that player is going to gain a poison counter, and then a Proliferate trigger is going to go on the stack and proliferate that poison counter. So it's almost like it has Toxic too. Pretty good. Next up is Contagious Vorak. I like this guy. This is a 3/3 Phyrexian Boar Beast for 2 and a green that says when it enters, we look at the top 4 of our library. We can reveal a land from among them, put it in our hand, and put the rest on the bottom in a random order. And if we didn't put a land in our card in our hand this way, we proliferate. So that means we can look at the top 4, and it does not mean if there's no lands we proliferate. It means we get to choose. Would we rather proliferate, or would we rather put a land from that top 4 into our hand? Obviously, if there aren't any lands there, we're going to proliferate. Might as well. But if there are some lands, well, we can choose not to take them. We reveal those, we look at those cards, and then we can just put them all on the bottom because it says you may reveal a land. We don't have to. So we've got a good option here for our 3/3 for 3. Next up is Glissa Sunslayer. This is a different version of Glissa. For 1, a black, and a green, we get a 3/3 legendary Phyrexian zombie elf with First Strike and Death Touch. So Glissa's already set herself up in her all-will-be-one incarnation to be a first striking Death Toucher. And it says whenever Glissa deals combat damage to a player, choose 1. We draw a card and lose a life, we destroy an enchantment, or we remove up to 3 counters from a target permanent. So this is not likely to come in to play that often in our deck, but you never know. Sometimes you're up against someone who's playing a counters deck, and you want to make it so they can't proliferate their own counters, or they can't they can't do all the damage that they're doing because it's a bunch of 1/1 counters and we want to just shave 3 off of something. Usually it's pretty good to draw a card or blow up an enchantment, but this last mode might be relevant. You never know. In any case, a 3-mana 3/3 with First Strike and Death Touch that maybe draws us a card or eats an enchantment when it does damage sounds good to me. Next up is Ichorous. Ichorous is 1 and double black for a 2/1 Phyrexian rat with Infect, and whenever this creature enters, each player gets a poison counter. So this is already pretty sweet, means everyone gets a poison counter. That does include us because it doesn't say each opponent, so it means we probably don't want to proliferate our own poison on us. But Infect is not toxic. Infect means this deals damage in the form of poison counters to players and in the form of -1/-1 counters to creatures. So if this does 2 damage to our opponent, if this attacks and is not blocked, let's say, then it won't actually do 2 damage. They won't lose 2 life. They will gain 2 poison counters instead. It's not quite the same thing as toxic, where they get both. But its power is the amount of poison they would get. So if we were to pump this up somehow, they would take more poison damage if they took damage from this. The same is true of when this does damage to a creature, in the sense that it'll do 2 -1/-1 counters to that creature rather than marking 2 damage on it. Now what's notable about this is that it's still doing damage. Infect does not prevent the damage, it replaces it with -1/-1 counters, but the damage is still happening. So that means if Glissa, our commander, gives the Ichorous First Strike and Death Touch, it will do its 2 Infect damage to that creature, and that creature will get 2 -1/-1 counters and die, because it's been dealt any amount of damage from a death-touching creature. It doesn't matter that that damage that was dealt was not marked on it in the form of damage marked. It's still going to kill that creature. So Ichorous is very powerful in this. We attack, it's going to eat the creatures that block it, the same way all of our other creatures will whenever they have First Strike and Death Touch from our commander. Or our opponent's going to have to take the damage, and it's like it has Toxic 2, because it's going to do 2 poison to them. It just won't do 2 actual, it won't cause them to lose 2 life on top of it. So pretty sweet, and a very nice way, again, to make sure that everyone's got a little poison that we can proliferate. Next up is Ichorous Basilisk. 2 and a green for a 1/3 Phyrexian Basilisk with Death Touch. It's just got Death Touch on its own, means it blocks very well and attacks very well, even without Glissa doing her thing, and it has Toxic 1. So that Death Touch, as I've often said, Death Touch on its own is a little bit of evasiveness. It's not perfect, but most of the time your opponent is going to say, well, if you're attacking me with a Death Toucher, I would rather just take 1 damage because I have 40 life. I don't mind taking that damage versus definitely losing my blocker. With Toxic, they may think about it a little differently. So you may be trading with this creature, which is fine. Get rid of whatever the creature they have, and then we can attack next turn, and they've got less to block with. But in any case, this is a pretty sweet setup for just a 1/3. Death Touch inherently and Toxic 1. Next we have Viral Spawning. 2 and a green for a sorcery that makes a 3/3 green Phyrexian Beast creature token with Toxic 1. So it's a 3/3 for 3 with Toxic 1. But it has a corrupted ability. As long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters and this card is in our graveyard, it has flashback for 2 and a green. So this is good early, it makes us a 3/3 with Toxic, and it's good late once one of our opponents has 3 poison. So then we can flash it back and make an additional 3/3 with Toxic 1. Pretty good. Next we have Recursion Rot Priest. 2 a black and a green for a 1/5 Phyrexian Zombie Cleric with Toxic 2. So again, if we attack with this, it's going to do 1 point of regular damage, and they're going to get 2 poison counters. And whenever a creature we control with Toxic deals combat damage to a player, that player gets an additional poison counter. So all the things I just said, this is attacking as a 1/1 First Strike, or a 1/5 First Strike Death Touch that's going to cause the defending player, if we hit them, to get 2 poison counters, and then another poison counter. And that's going to happen, this trigger, with every creature that does that damage, thanks to Toxic. Pretty sweet. Plus, we can pay 1 a black and a green to give one of our creatures with Toxic Death Touch until end of turn. Usually we're getting that from our commander, but in case we're not, we might have the extra mana lying around to just do so for the Rot Priests themselves or for one of our other creatures. Phyrexian Obliterator is next. I put this in because it's just so good, and we're a Phyrexians deck in black, so of course we're running it. This is quad black for a 5/5 Phyrexian Horror with Trample that says whenever a source deals combat damage to this player, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents of their choice. So if somebody says, I'm going to do 5 damage to your Obliterator to kill it, we say, okay, sacrifice 5 permanents. So that's a 5-for-1 for us. If we attack with the Phyrexian Obliterator, and it's a 5/5 trample with first strike and death touch thanks to our commander, then we're probably killing everything. But if something manages to kill it too, or to do damage to it as well, then however much damage it takes, the defending player, or the controller of that creature that dealt damage to the Obliterator, is going to have to sacrifice a number of permanents equal to the amount of damage that was done to it. So this is really difficult to block unless you think you're going to kill it, and you have a bunch of things you're willing to throw away, like a bunch of tokens. So yeah, Phyrexian Obliterator, a lot of fun in this deck, especially if there's a way for you to give it Toxic, which we maybe see in a little bit. Plague Nurse is next. 3 and a green for a 3/4 Phyrexian Cleric with Toxic 2, and 2 and a green, each other creature you control with Toxic gains Toxic 1 until the end of turn. Activate only once per turn. So this is Toxic 1, and a player dealt combat damage by a creature with Toxic also gets poison counters equal to that creature's total Toxic value. So this is just saying they get extra Toxic. So yeah, just a little bit of additional toxicity. Next we have Terror of Tawashi. 2 and double black for a 4/3 Phyrexian Ogre with inherent death touch. And whenever this creature attacks, we may pay 3 and a black. And if we do, we return target creature from our graveyard to the battlefield, and it is a Phyrexian, in addition to its other types, in case it wasn't already. So we get to bring things back every time this attacks for Zombify mana. Pretty good. Venomous Brutalizer is next. 2 and double green for a 4/4 Phyrexian Knight with Toxic 3. It says when this creature enters, we can pay 1 and a green, and if we do, proliferate. So if we happen to have 6 mana, and our opponents already have some poison counters, then we're set. We drop the Brutalizer, it's a 4/4 with Toxic 3, we've paid 2 more, and everyone's going to get an extra poison counter. Sweet. Contaminant Grafter is next. 4 and a green for a 5/5 Phyrexian Druid with Trample and Toxic 1. So a 5/5 for 5 with Trample and Toxic 1, already nice. And whenever one or more creatures we control deal combat damage to one or more players, proliferate. So they have hedged their bets very hard on this. It's only 1 proliferate, no matter how many of our creatures deal combat damage and to how many players. But anytime even one of them does, we proliferate. So that's great. Over and over again, we get that same kind of proliferation that we get from Bloated Contaminator. Same sort of deal. In addition, it has a corrupted ability. At the beginning of our end step, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, we draw a card, and then we can put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. It doesn't even say tapped. This is just Growth Spiral for free if we have an opponent that has 3 or more poison counters. We get that every end step with the Grafter in play. Pretty good. Next is Defiler of Vigor from Dominaria United. 3 and double green for a 6/6 Trampling Phyrexian Worm. Look at this big guy. That says, adds an additional cost. To cast green permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost a green mana less to cast. If you paid it this way, it only reduces the amount of green mana you pay. So this is a lot of things to say this. Are you casting a green permanent? Pretend one of the green pips is a Phyrexian green pip. You can pay 2 life instead of that green pip. If you don't want to, it's fine. You can only do it for one of the green pips and only on green permanent spells, but feel free to spend life when you do that. So yeah, Defiler of Vigor gives us a little bit of a discount, a little bit of acceleration here if you want to think of it that way, because we have a lot of green in our deck. I think we're about 2/3 green. So, helpful. In addition, whenever you cast a green permanent spell, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. That's huge. It is also something that is proliferatable. So we can add more and more counters, even without casting more of these spells, just whenever we proliferate. It is worth noticing, though, that the the incubator tokens that Glissa makes are not creatures until you transform them. So they don't get these counters unless they've been transformed. Just worth remembering. Next is Vorinclex from March of the Machine. If you want to see Vorinclex at the head of his own deck, I built him. So check out my linked playlist in the video's description to see the Vorinclex deck. I think I called it Borinclex, the bland evolution. Anyway, 3 and double green for a 6/6 legendary Phyrexian Praetor with Trample and Reach. And when Vorinclex enters, we search our library for up to 2 forests, reveal them, put them on our hand, and shuffle. It does not say basic forests, so we can definitely find our dual-typed lands if we want to. We have a few of those in this deck. We can also pay 6 and double green and exile Vorinclex, then return to the battlefield transformed under our control as a sorcery. Vorinclex becomes a saga. If you haven't seen sagas before, when they enter, and at the start of our first main phase, it gets a lore counter, and it triggers the ability based on the number of lore counters it has. So when this first transforms, it's going to enter and get a lore counter, and it's going to get its first chapter ability, which is mill 10 cards, put up to 2 creature cards from among the milled cards onto the battlefield. So we just get some free creatures, hopefully. At the start of our next main phase, or our next turn's first main phase, we will get the second lore counter, and we will get to distribute 7 1/1 counters among any number of target creatures we control. It could be putting all 7 on one thing, whatever we want. And then, the next turn's first main phase, we will get this ability. Until the end of turn, creatures we control pay a generic mana. This creature fights target creature you don't control. We also exile the saga and return it to the battlefield as Vorinclex, which means he will enter again and we'll get to search our library for 2 more forests. So Vorinclex is a lot of mana to do an awful lot. I want to specifically talk about this last ability. All of our creatures gain the ability to fight another creature for just a single generic mana. We can use that after attacking with them. That does not say activate this only as a sorcery. So we can do this in our post-combat main phase. We can do it during combat. Most importantly, we can do this after attacking with them or after going to combat, that is, and getting our trigger from Glissa that gives all of our Phyrexians First Strike and Death Touch. Now, First Strike does not matter when it comes to fighting. A fight just means 2 creatures deal damage to each other equal to their respective powers. That happens simultaneously. First Strike is not a part of it. But Death Touch still matters in a fight because you're still doing damage, and so a creature with Death Touch doing damage to something kills that thing if that thing isn't somehow immune, like being indestructible. So if we were to do this in a way that lets us kill our opponent's creatures by saying, oh, I've got a 4/4, it's got First Strike and Death Touch until end of turn, and this saga gave it this ability, I'm going to go to combat, it gets the First Strike and Death Touch, before even declaration of attackers. We can say, I'm going to pay 1 and have this creature fight something else that wouldn't kill it, but it will definitely kill the thing it fights. So we can clear the way before we even declare attackers. Or in the middle of combat if we feel like it. If somebody has, blocked our 1/1 with First Strike and Death Touch, if we say, well, you're blocking with a token, I'd rather you block with one of your big creatures, I'm just going to pay a mana to have this thing have my little 1/1 fight your big creature. So my 1/1 will die, but so will your big creature, and I don't have to worry about that token. So yeah, lots of fun things we can do with the Grand Evolution, and the front side of Vorinclex is also great. It's a 6/6 with Trample and Reach for 5 that draws us 2 lands. Pretty good. Next is Glissa's Retriever. Doesn't look much like Glissa's dog, but she seems like a weird lady, so who knows. For 5 and a green, we get a 6/6 Phyrexian Beast with Haste and Toxic 3. It's got Haste. It's a 6/6. Toxic 3. All this is good. And it can be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Already very nice. But it also has a corrupted ability. When it dies, we exile it, and when we do, we return up to X target cards from our graveyard to our hand, where X is the number of opponents who have 3 or more poison counters. So we can just get some free Raise Dead effects, or some free regrowth effects, I should say, on this, because it's cards, not just creatures or permanents. Yeah. Next is Goliath Hatchery. This is one of the all will be one jumpstart cards, but luckily not expensive. For 4 and double green, we get an enchantment that says when it enters, we make 2 of those 3/3 green Phyrexian beast creature tokens with Toxic 1. So it's 6 mana for 2 3/3s, both of which have Toxic 1. That's okay. And it has a corrupted ability at the beginning of our upkeep. If an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, we choose a creature we control and then draw cards equal to its total toxic value. So that might be just 1, because we have one of these. But if we have a creature that has Toxic 3, for example, Glissa's Retriever, then we get to just draw 3 cards during our upkeep because someone else already has 3 poison. Pretty good. Next is Massacre Worm, a classic. 3 and triple black for a 6/5 Phyrexian worm that says when it enters, creatures our opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. So it's a little baby board wipe. And even more relevantly, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, whether it's from us or anyone else's reason, whether they sacrifice it, whether a different opponent has attacked them and they've blocked, and they trade even, any time a creature an opponent controls dies, its controller loses 2 life. Doesn't work for our creatures, just all of our opponent's creatures. That means when we attack with First Strike and Death Touch, if they block any of those creatures that dies, it's going to cost them 2 life. This is a different axis of damage, of moving the game along than our poison counters, and sometimes it's enough. You know, sometimes we can just kill people with combat damage. We don't have to kill them with poison. That's still pretty good. Massacre Worm works great for us in both ways. Phyrexian Swarmlord is next. 4 and double green for a 4/4 Phyrexian Insect Horror that has Infect. So again, it will either do 0 damage and 4 poison counters to an opponent, or it will do 4 -1/-1 counters to a creature. And if it is blocked, when it has First Strike and Death Touch, it's just going to do 1 damage in the form of a -1/-1 counter to its blocker, and then the other 3, well, it doesn't have Trample, so yeah, it'll do 4 -1/-1 counters, and that'll kill the creature, assuming it doesn't have Indestructible. So yeah. Anyway, at the beginning of your upkeep, you make a 1/1 green Phyrexian Insect creature token with Infect for each poison counter your opponents have. So they're just going to keep making more and more little 1/1s with Infect, and we're going to keep giving more and more poison. I think this is our last creature that has Infect, so we really only have 2 creatures in the deck with Infect, but this one does make more, so consider. Next we have Wormquake. 4 and double green for a sorcery that says create an XX Phyrexian Worm creature token with Trample and Toxic 1, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast a spell, so usually a 6/6. Then for each opponent with 3 or more poison counters, we make another one of those. So it could be that if all 3 of our opponents have 3 or more poison, we're spending 6 mana to make 4 6/6s. That's pretty great. And then when we flash it back, we're spending 10 mana on it, assuming we want to do that, which means we're making 4 10/10s with Trample and Toxic 1 each. That's pretty great. Next we have Paladin of Predation. Great for our commander, the Herald of Predation. 5 and double green for a 6/7 Phyrexian Knight with Toxic 6. Unbelievable. And it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. This is very strong. There's no reason our opponents should let this through. If they do, we've done a very good job of getting rid of their stuff. If we've been able to give it Trample somehow, and we can give it First Strike and Death Touch thanks to Glissa, yeah, this is going to end games. Tyrannax Rex is next, and even better in that sense. It's also 7 mana, but it's 4 and triple green for an 8/8 Phyrexian dinosaur that can't be countered. It has Trample, it has Ward 4, which might as well be hexproof, and it has Haste. It can attack right away, and it has Toxic 4. So this is an 8/8 Trample Haste, can't be countered, has Ward. Hopefully it has First Strike and Death Touch as well, because of Glissa. And so it's going to be doing that 4 toxic damage to whoever we're attacking with it. Love this guy. Last in the section is one of our other board wipes. It's Azuri's Predation. More Predation for the Herald of Predation. 5 and triple green for a sorcery that says, for each creature your opponents control, make a 4/4 green Phyrexian Beast creature token, and each of those tokens fights a different one of those creatures. That means we count up all the creatures that our opponents have, we make that many 4/4s, and each of our opponent's creatures gets fought by a 4/4. So we might lose our 4/4s if they've got bigger than 4/4, but we're probably going to have them lose a bunch of things as well if those things are like a 3/4 or smaller. And even if it trades, this means we are killing basically everything except for the big stuff. And we get any of these 4/4s that we have that are left over, those are Phyrexians. So we get to use those later and give them first strike and death touch thanks to Glissa when we attack with them. So that is our Phyrexian section. I want to go over our poison section now. We've got a lot of cards in here that are ways of giving poison, but many of them are these Phyrexians we've already seen, like the Venerated Rot Priest, so this section shouldn't take too long. Of course, the Rot Priest has Toxic 1 and gives a target opponent a poison counter whenever our creatures get targeted by a spell. That could be ours or theirs. Blightbelly Rat has Toxic 1 and proliferates when it dies. Finn the Fangbearer from Kaldheim is 1 and a green for a 1/3 legendary human warrior, not a Phyrexian. He has Death Touch, that's okay. And whenever a creature we control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. So our opponents, with Finn and Glissa out, have a hard choice. If we attack with our Phyrexians or with Finn, because he innately has Death Touch, then the Phyrexians especially are going to have Death Touch and First Strike, thanks to Glissa. So it's going to kill whatever blocks it. And if they don't block, each of those creatures is going to trigger Finn and give the defending player 2 poison counters in addition to whatever toxic or infect it might have had. So Finn absolutely is a way for us to close out games and is only a 2-drop. So if our opponents decide to use removal on him rather than on something else like Glissa, that's totally fine with us. And if they want to use their removal on Glissa instead, we've still got Finn, and we're going to be able to do a lot of damage with him as well. Not as much, because Glissa's not handing out Death Touch to all of our creatures, but as you've seen, a number of our creatures already have it. So anyway, Finn does too. Worth thinking. Next we have Infectious Bite. This is Rabid Bite, but each opponent gets a poison counter. 1 and a green for an instant. Target creature we control deals damage equal to its power to target creature we don't control. And like I said, each opponent gets a poison counter. This is so good because, again, we can use this at instant speed after Glissa has given our creatures First Strike and Death Touch. First Strike doesn't matter here because it's not a fight anyway, but Death Touch still does. So Infectious Bite, when one of our creatures has Death Touch, just means kill target creature, destroy target creature, as long as it doesn't have, indestructible or something. And as long as we've got valid targets for this, it doesn't matter what happens to those creatures. Each opponent's still going to get a poison counter. Pretty good. The Mere Convert has Toxic. Necrogen Communion is 1 and a black for an aura that enchants one of our creatures and gives them Toxic 2. That's a nice way for us to do something fun with this. And whenever an enchanted creature dies, return that creature to the battlefield under our control. So this is sort of, it's not quite the same thing as Umbra Armor, but in a way it is. We can put this, we can sort of treat it like a scam card, like Fungal Fortitude, something like that. Because whenever the creature dies, we're going to get it to come back. It doesn't even come back tapped. And it has Toxic 2 for as long as the Communion is on it. So pretty good. Pestilent Siphoner has Toxic, so does Bloated Contaminator. It also proliferates when it does combat damage to a player. Ichorous has Infect. Ichorspit Basilisk has Toxic. Infectious Inquiry is 2 and a black for a sorcery that says we draw 2 and we lose 2, and each opponent gets a poison counter. Another way to just hand out those poison counters. Phyrexians Outbreak is another one of our sort of baby wraths. For 2 and a black, we get a sorcery that says each opponent gets a poison counter, already good, and then each creature our opponents control gets -1/-1 until end of turn for each poison counter its controller has. So at the very least, everything's getting -1/-1. Everything of our opponents, that is. So this can be very nice for us, especially later in the game. We've seen Viral Spawning. It makes beasts with Toxic 1. Vraska's Fall is 2 and a black for an instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker of their choice and gets a poison counter. So this is, again, just handing out additional poison. In addition to a little bit of an edict effect. That's nice. The Rot Priest has Toxic, so does the Plague Nurse, so does the Brutalizer, the Grafter. Noxious Assault is 3 and double green for a sorcery that says creatures we control get +2/+2 until end of turn. Very nice for our infect creatures, like the little insects that we're making. And whenever a creature blocks this turn, its controller gets a poison counter. That is so strong. It means we attack with everything, and our opponents either have to block lose a creature, and get a poison counter per creature that they're blocking. Or they have to let our creatures through, and we're doing our toxic or infect damage to them. So this disincentivizes blocking, increases the amount of damage we're doing, and helps to ensure we're likely to be able to do that damage in a way that is toxic. On top, this is sort of like an alternative. We don't even really need Death Touch and First Strike with this. Although if we have it, that's still pretty good, because our opponents are like, well, even with Death Touch and First Strike, it's better than them getting in and doing damage to me. So they block, and when they block, poison counter every time a creature blocks. That even means if one of our creatures is attacking and they multi-block it, they get a poison counter for each of the creatures that blocked, not just for the one creature of ours that's attacking. Noxious Assault is 5 mana, but very nice for us. A great overrun. Sort of. Glissa's Retriever has Toxic. Goliath Hatchery makes 2 toxic beasts. Phyrexian Swarmlord has Infect, Wormquake, and Paladin of Predation and Tyrannix Rex all create or are creatures with Toxic. So yeah, lots of different ways to give poison, most of which are creatures, but not all of them. So those are the big parts of our game plan. We're going to talk about the supplemental cards to our game plan, cards that help it out. But first, I want to go back over these sections of support for it, starting with our card advantage section, which, as usual, I've tagged as draw. It doesn't mean all of these do the draw action. It just means it gives us access to a card that we might otherwise not have so that we can cast it or use it. Starting with Green Sun Twilight. For X and a green, we get a sorcery that says reveal the top X+1 cards of your library. Choose a creature and or a land from among them. Put those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom in a random order. If X is 5 or more, instead put those cards onto the battlefield or into your hand and the rest on the bottom in a random order. So the idea is with this, if X is 2, let's say, then we're spending 3 mana to look at the top 3. If we find a creature and a land, we get to put both in our hand. Great. But if X is 5, we're looking at the top 5, finding a creature and or a land, and putting both onto the battlefield if we wish. We don't have to, we can put them in our hand. And then everything beyond 5 works that same way. So Green Sun's Twilight does require us to spend at least 1 more mana than the green, but it hits on creatures and lands, and that's great. Thirsting Roots is next. This is our Lay of the Land for the deck. It's a green for a sorcery that says choose one. Either Lay of the Land, search your library for a basic, reveal it, put it in your hand and shuffle, or just Proliferate. So good early game, good late game. Deadly Dispute is next. For 1 and a black, and we have an instant that says as an additional cost, sack an artifact or a creature, then draw 2 cards and make a treasure. Very, very nice. Remember, those incubator tokens, before they've been transformed, aren't creatures, but they are artifacts. So this is a great way for us to turn one of those things into 2 cards and a treasure, which is a little bit of acceleration, but mostly draw. Card that works a little similarly is Eviscerator's Insight. 1 and a black for an instant, as an additional cost, sack an artifact or creature, and draw 2 cards. So it's not as good as Deadly Dispute, because all that text is the same, except Deadly Dispute goes on to say, and create a treasure token. But Eviscerator's Insight has flashback for 4 and a black, so we can do this again. So it's a little bit different. Both ways are good for us to turn our unhatched incubator eggs into cards. Next we have Herd Heirloom from Tarkir Dragonstorm. 1 and a green for an artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color, so it's a mana rock, but we can only spend this mana to cast creature spells. That's okay, we've got quite a few creature spells in this deck. We can also tap it, and until end of turn, target creature we control with power 4 or greater, so it can't target anything with power 3 or less, gains trample, and curiosity. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card. So this is a good way for us to get card draw by activating this after blockers, but before damage, or before or after blockers when our creature has been blocked and has First Strike and Death Touch, but our opponent is still going to block it. If that creature that we're attacking with has power 4 or greater, it also gets trample. So it won't just kill the creature it's blocking or creatures it's blocking. It will also trample over, and when it does, we draw a card from it. So Herd Heirloom does a lot for us, and that's when we're not spending its mana on creature spells. The Vorak lets us look at the top 4 and reveal a land to put it in our hand, or if we don't want to, we can proliferate. Garruk's Uprising also cares about creatures that are power 4 or greater. This is 2 and a green for an enchantment that says all of our creatures have trample, just all the time. That's very good, especially with our first striking and death touching that we're doing with Glissa. But also, when it enters, if we control a creature power 4 or greater, we draw a card. But what if we want to cast those creatures after Garruk's Uprising is in play? Well, that's all right. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters under your control, draw a card. So we get to draw cards when it comes in and when those creatures come in, both. And otherwise, everything has trample. Very nice. We've seen Glissa. Glissa lets us draw cards when she does combat damage to a player if we want to choose that first mode. Infectious Inquiry lets us draw 2 cards and lose 2 life, and everyone gets a poison counter. Everyone but us, that is. Contaminate Grafter lets us draw cards at our end step if one of our opponents is corrupted, based on the... it just lets us draw a card and then put a land in our hand onto the battlefield if we wish. Next we have Glorious Sunrise. I went back and forth about this card, but I think it's very good in this deck. For 3 and double green, we have an enchantment that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, so this triggers at the same time as Glissa, choose one of these 4. Creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn, so that's extremely good. Just the trample even, with our commander's ability of giving everything plus first strike and death touch. Or target land gains, tap to add 3 green until end of turn. Or draw a card if you control a creature with power 3 or greater, so it doesn't even have to be ferocious. Or just gain 3 life. So most of the time, I'm hoping we're going to be choosing this one, because this is so good. First strike, death touch, and trample. What a great combination. But sometimes we need to accelerate. Sometimes we need to draw a card. I don't think we're going to be gaining a lot of life, but you never know. Glorious Sunrise is here to give us options. We've seen Vorinclex. Vorinclex lets us find 2 forests and put them in our hand when Vorinclex enters. And of course, Goliath Hatchery lets us draw cards at the beginning of our upkeep equal to the total toxic value of one of our creatures if one of our opponents has 3 or more poison counters. So that's pretty good. And those are our card advantage spells. Let's talk about acceleration, which again, we've just shorthanded as ramp. So Everflowing Chalice is here. It's a 0 mana artifact with Moldy Kicker 2, meaning when we cast it, we can pay 2 generic mana any number of times. So that's 2, 4, 8, 6, 10, whatever you want. We just can't pay like 5 mana because it's only even numbers. And it enters with a number of charge counters on it, with a number of charge counters on it equal to the number of times it was kicked. So if we pay 6 mana for this, it's going to come in with 3 counters on it. And when we tap it, it makes a colorless mana for each counter on it. So that's pretty nice. But we have lots of ways to proliferate in this deck. So if we just kick this once, if we pay a total of 2 for it, it's going to come in and be an untapped artifact that taps for 1 colorless mana. So sort of like a Mind Stone that we can't crack for a card. But every time we proliferate, we're going to be able to put more counters on it and make more mana out of it. So this is very nice for us in this deck. I didn't run Astral Cornucopia in this deck, which is essentially the same card, except it costs XXX, and it gets a counter for each X, and it taps for mana of any one color, equal to the number of counters on it, simply because you'd have to pay at least 3 to get it out, whereas this you can get out for 2. But if you wanted to do Astral Cornucopia instead, or in addition, it would be a good option for you, and it's in the considering section. We've seen Green Sun's Twilight. It can let us find a land and put it in our hand or onto the battlefield. Soul Ring, of course, we've got to run it. It's 1 generic mana for an artifact that taps for 2 colorless mana. Very nice for us. We're also, of course, running Arcane Signet. It's a mana rock that costs 2 and taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. That is to say, in this deck, it taps for black or green. It comes in untapped and only costs 2. Very good. Armored Scrapforger also costs 2 and taps for 1 mana of any color. Love it. Deadly Dispute makes a treasure. Farseek is one of our rampant growths. This is 1 and a green for a sorcery that says search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain, basically anything other than a forest. Put it on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. So in our deck, we can only find swamps. But luckily we have dual-typed lands that are both swamps and forests. So this does not say search your library for a land card that isn't a forest. It just says search your library for a swamp. So we can find a swamp forest, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Very good for us. Golgari Signet is next. This is one of the signets. It's 2 generic mana for a rock that if we pay 1 and tap it, it makes 2 mana, a black and a green. So we're sort of having to tap 2 mana sources, whatever we're paying this with, and the signet itself to get 2 mana. So it's not like super mana positive, but it does fix our mana, and it's very nice for that, and inexpensive. Next, we've seen Herald Heirloom. It's a 2 mana rock that taps for mana of any color, as long as it's just for creature spells. That's good. Mere Convert, again, we can pay essentially Phyrexian mana this way. We tap it and pay 2 life to make a mana of any color. That's good. Springleaf Parade makes our creature tokens tap for mana of any color. That's good. Now, to go with our signet, we have Talisman of Resistance. This is a 2 mana rock that just taps for colorless. Or we can tap it for black or green if we're willing to let it do 1 damage to us. Usually the way this plays out is we don't mind letting it do that damage to us because we need that colored mana in that moment. If we didn't, we wouldn't be able to cast whatever spell we're doing, so it's worth that damage. The rest of the time, when we don't definitely need colored mana from this rock, well, we just tap it for colorless. So fixes our mana in the way that we most need, and it's worth taking a few damage over the course of the game to make sure we can always cast the spells we want. Replicating Ring is next. This is the Manolith I put in here rather than Astral Cornucopia, because I think it's just very fun. This is 3 generic mana for a snow artifact. The snow function, or the snow super type, is not relevant in this deck, but it's cool. And it taps for 1 mana of any color. And at the beginning of our upkeep, we put a night counter onto this artifact. Night counters don't have an inherent meaning, they just are used by the Replicating Ring. And then, if it has 8 or more night counters on it, we remove all of them and create 8 colorless snow artifact creature tokens named Replicated Ring with tap to add 1 mana of any color. So the idea here is we play this, and 8 turns later, we end up with 8 more of them. Or maybe we can do it faster if we proliferate those night counters. And if we can get repeated proliferations, we might be able to get this 4 or 5 turns later. That's still late game, but at that point, we're adding 8 Manoliths to the battlefield. So we essentially don't have to worry about mana anymore. That seems pretty good. Expand the Sphere is next. This is 3 and a green for a sorcery that says look at the top 6 cards of your library and put up to 2 land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom of your random order. If you put fewer than 2 lands onto the battlefield this way, proliferate a number of times equal to the difference. So this is 4 mana to look at the top 6 cards and proliferate twice. That seems fine. But if you want to proliferate only once, you can take one of the lands you found from those 6 and put it on the battlefield tapped. It doesn't have to be a basic land. And if you don't really need to proliferate, but you're looking for mana, and you see 2 lands in those 6, go ahead and put them both on the battlefield tapped. So the way to look at this is 4 mana to maybe proliferate twice, but you can also use it to accelerate yourself if you can find those lands, and it's not hard to do so. We've got plenty of lands in our deck. So yeah, this is not explosive vegetation, but it's sort of like it for our deck. Contaminant Grafter, as we've seen, lets us, at the beginning of the end step, if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, we get to draw, but then we get to put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. That's not our land drop for the turn, so it's a growth spiral effect. It's acceleration. Defiler of Vigor lets us pay 2 life rather than one of the green pips in our green permanent spells, of which we have so many, so that accelerates us. And Glorious Sunrise lets us have one of our lands tap for 3 mana until end of turn if we wish. So that is our acceleration section. Let's talk now about interaction, which again I've just shorthanded as removal. So Whisper of the Drost is first. This is a single black for an instant that gives a creature -1/-1 until end of turn and lets us proliferate. So it only kills something, just one little something. We can't even proliferate that amount because that's not a counter. But we get to proliferate on top of killing something small, or maybe we've gotten into a situation where an opponent's creature has enough damage marked on it that if it takes 1 more damage, it would die. Well, we can just kill it. Or we can do that on another opponent's turn. Maybe opponent A has attacked opponent B, and one of them has a creature that's not quite dead. Well, we can make it dead and proliferate on top of it. We do have to have a creature to target with this, even if all we want is the proliferate effect. Next is Anoint with Affliction. For 1 and a black, we get an instant that exiles target creature if it has mana value 3 or less. But if a player has 3 or more poison counters, we can exile one of their creatures no matter what its mana value is. So we can exile a creature just entirely if its controller has 3 or more poison counters. So yeah, it's eliminate for little creatures, and for our opponents that are corrupted, it's just a straight up better than Doomblade. Cankerbloom, we can sacrifice to destroy an artifact or an enchantment, or to proliferate. Contagion Clasp works a little bit like Whisper of the Dross. For 2 generic mana, we get an artifact that when it enters, we put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, so that'll just stick around. And then we can pay 4 and tap it to proliferate. We can proliferate that -1/-1 counter, but also all the poison we're doing. Seems good. Yeah. Drown in Ichorous next. Target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn, proliferate. This is 1 and a black for a sorcery. So it's sort of the Big Daddy version of Whisper of the Dross. Both are helpful. This is more likely to kill something, but both are going to give us a little proliferation. Infectious Bite, of course, is a bite spell that causes each opponent also to get a poison counter. Like I mentioned, we can use this with our commander giving our creatures First Strike and Death Touch. The First Strike isn't relevant, but the Death Touch will mean that whatever creature we bite with Infectious Bite is going to die, assuming it doesn't have something like, indestructible. Tear Asunder is next. This is a black and green deck, so we want to run this card. It's so good. 1 and a green for an instant that says exile target artifact or enchantment. So it's just a better naturalize. But it also has kicker for 1 and a black, meaning we can pay a total of 2 of black and a green. And if it was kicked, instead exile target non-land permanent. So just for 4 mana, we can just get rid of anything that isn't a land. And if we need to get rid of an artifact or an enchantment, well, then we only need to pay the 1 and a green. Very good. Glissa, whenever Glissa does combat damage to a player, we can destroy an enchantment. Or remove 3 counters from a permanent, which might kill something, but we can at least destroy an enchantment. Vraska's Fall is an edict for each of our opponents, plus everyone gets a poison counter but us. Phyrexian Obliterator causes the controller of a source of damage that damages Phyrexian Obliterator to sacrifice a number of permanents equal to the amount of damage dealt to it. So not directly removal, but it's 1 more than the 10 I try to have. And of course, Vorinclex. It takes a while to turn Vorinclex into a removal spell, but when we do, it makes every one of our creatures into a removal spell by giving them, with Glissa, First Strike and Death Touch, and then having them fight things. So there we go. We have our interaction spells there. We have some Wraths. We've seen them all already, though. They don't all Wrath like in the biggest possible way. None of them actually say destroy all creatures, but Phyrexians Outbreak gives each opponent's creatures -X until end of turn, where X is the number of poison counters that player has, and it starts by giving them one of those poison counters. Massacre Worm, more simply, gives all of our opponent's creatures -2/2 until end of turn. And Aziri's Predation makes a bunch of 4/4 beasts, and each one of them fights a creature our opponents control. So yeah, those are our Wraths. Let's talk now about our supplemental sections, starting with our Pump section. It's small, but it's helpful. Defiler of Vigor, whenever we cast a green permanent spell, all of our creatures get a 1/1 counter. Glorious Sunrise, we can choose to give all of our creatures +1/+1 and trample until end of turn at the start of combat. Noxious Assault gives all of our creatures +2/+2, and makes it so whenever any of them get blocked this turn, the blocker's controller gets a poison counter. And Vorinclex on the back. Oh no, what have I done? Vorinclex on the back, the second chapter, lets us distribute 7 1/1 counters among our creatures. So those are our pump spells. We've talked a little bit about Proliferate. Here are all the Proliferate cards collected. Thirsting Roots lets us proliferate if we don't want to lay of the land. Whisper of the Dross lets us proliferate in addition to giving something -1/-1. Blightbelly Rat proliferates when it dies. Cankerbloom can proliferate when we kill it. Contagion Clasp we can pay for and tap it to proliferate over and over. Drown in Ichor proliferates in addition to giving something -4/-4 until end of turn. Unnatural Restoration is 1 and a green for a sorcery that returns a permanent card from our graveyard to our hand and proliferates. So this is our regrowth effect. Bloated Contaminator proliferates when it does combat damage to a player. Contagious Vorak can proliferate when it enters if we don't put a land from the top 4 on our library into our hand. Evolution Sage is one of our other non-Phyrexian creatures in the deck. 2 and a green for a 3/2 Elf Druid with landfall. Whenever a land we control enters, proliferate. So this is excellent repeatable proliferate. especially if we have ways to get extra lands into play, which we do. So yeah, very nice with that. Expand the Sphere is one of those. We might be able to look at the top 6 of our library and find 2 lands and put them into play, and they'll both trigger Evolution Sage. Venomous Brutalizer lets us pay an additional 1 and a green when it enters to proliferate, and Contaminant Grafter lets us proliferate whenever one or more of our creatures deal combat damage to one or more players. So enough proliferate to support our game plan. Let's talk about our synergy cards. These cards are ones that care about the amount of things. Artifacts, counters, poison, that sort of thing. So anything that has corrupted counts. So if someone has 3 or more poison counters, we can exile one of their creatures, whether or not it has mana value 3 or less. Grafted Butcher cares about our artifacts, right? Oh, what am I talking about? I'm sorry. I'm misreading the Grafted Butcher. It's in the synergy section because it cares about all of our Phyrexians. So yeah, synergizes with that. Plus gives them all menace when it enters. There we go. Losing my mind. Viral Spawning is corrupted. So it cares about the opponents with 3 or more poison counters. Same thing is true of Contaminant Grafter and Glissa's Retriever and Goliath Hatchery and Wormquake. These are all corrupted cards, except for Grafted Butcher, which it's just important to recognize that it's a typal card, really. But like I mentioned, we don't have that many typal synergies as much, but Grafted Butcher is one of them. So that is our synergy section. Next, let's talk about how we get our creatures around our opponent's defenses. Grafted Butcher, as we've seen, when it enters, all of our Phyrexians get menace. Herd Heirloom, if we tap it, we can give one of our creatures with power 4 or greater trample and curiosity until end of turn. Garruk's Uprising gives all of our creatures trample. Glorious Sunrise lets us give all our creatures +1/+1 and trample until end of turn, and Noxious Assault, while not giving evasion, does mean that if our creatures do get blocked, the blocking creatures' controllers get poison counters. So that's us still getting something through, even if we're blocked. So that's sort of us evading defenses in a way. That is our evasion section. Let's go to how we protect our creatures. We only have one way, and we only really want to protect Glissa because we don't want to have recaster that many times. So for 2 generic mana, we get the Swifties. Swiftfoot Boots are an equipment that equips for 1 and give the equipped creature hexproof and haste. Giving Glissa hexproof is really all we need. Giving her haste is fine, but we want to be able to make it so she can't be targeted by our opponent's spells and abilities and thereby shut down, because so much of our deck relies or is empowered by giving all of our creatures First Strike and Death Touch. So yeah, that's where Glissa is going, and that's why we have the Swifties in the deck. If you want to run something a little bit stronger than this, like a Darksteel Plate or a Lightning Greaves, go for it. Swiftfoot Boots, amazingly, have been printed over and over and over, and the Foundation's printing is $1.80. You can see how popular these are. That is our protection section. We next have a recursion section. These are cards that either get our cards back from the graveyard or can get themselves back. Vat of Rebirth. I love this card. A single black for an artifact that says whenever another artifact or creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on the vat. And if we pay 2 and a black and tap it and remove 4 oil counters from it, we can return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield, just as a sorcery, but still. So the idea of being able to sacrifice our unhatched Phyrexians and put counters on this, in addition to getting counters on it when our creatures die, then all we have to do is have 4 on it to pay 3 and tap it and straight up reanimate it. That sounds great. Grafted Butcher, we can recur itself by sacking an artifact or creature and paying 4 to bring it back from the graveyard to the battlefield, and we get its interest trigger when we do. Necrogen Communion, when the enchanted creature dies, it comes back to the battlefield under our control. A Natural Restoration lets us regrow a permanent card from our graveyard to our hand. Terror of Tawashi, when it attacks, we can pay 3 in our black and return one of our creatures in our graveyard to the battlefield, and it's a Phyrexian, so we get to zombify something. And Glissa's Retriever, when it dies, we can exile it, and for each of our opponents with 3 or more poison counters, we can get a card from our graveyard back into our hand. Pretty good for recursion. Next up, we have a small section that makes tokens, just to note where our tokens are coming from if we're making them. So Viral Spawning All it does is make a 3/3 beast with Toxic 1. And it can make a second one when we flash it back, once someone is corrupted. Phyrexian Swarmlord, at the beginning of our upkeep, makes a number of 1/1 Phyrexian insects with Infect for each poison counter our opponents have. And Azorius Predation makes a 4/4 beast for every single creature our opponents control, and maybe some of them will survive after they fight all of our opponents' creatures. Finally, for our spells, we have some outlets. It's just worth noting, we can sacrifice our artifacts and creatures with these 3 cards. Deadly Dispute does it to draw us 2 and make a treasure. Eviscerator's Insight does it just to draw us 2, but we can flash it back. And Grafted Butcher lets us do it, like I mentioned, to bring the Grafted Butcher back from the graveyard to the battlefield. All of which will empower our Vat of Rebirth to bring our things back. Not to mention, we can do other fun stuff with it too. So that is all of the spells in the deck. As usual, we're going to go over our land base now, starting with our basic lands. We're running 21 of them, mostly forests, but a little more than half are swamps, just because even if we were to make this exactly the right proportions, which would usually be a little bit more green and a little bit less black, I want to make sure we aren't hurting on black in case we need it early on, so this is the proportion I decided on, and it works pretty well for this balance. We're running Festering Thicket, which is a bicycle land. It means it is a typed dual land. Comes in tapped, it is a swamp and is a forest, so it taps for black and green. But we can also pay 2 generic and discard it from our hand to cycle it, meaning we discard it and we draw a different card. So good for us to do early on, good for us to do later when we don't need more lands, but also good for us to fetch with something like Farseek, because Farseek can find a swamp and put it on the battlefield tapped. Well, this comes into play tapped anyway, so we're getting a land that's tapped that makes both of our colors. Pretty good as a target for that. Woodland Cemetery is a check land, meaning it is not typed, it taps for black or green, and it enters tapped unless we control a swamp or a forest. That doesn't mean just a basic swamp and forest. Festering Thicket will make it come in untapped too, because it is a swamp and a forest as well. So we've got 23 cards in the deck that will make the Woodland Cemetery come in untapped. Pretty good. If you want it to be a little bit more consistent, even though that's pretty consistent, you could upgrade it to the Deathcap Glade Slow land, which only requires that you have 2 other lands in play for it to come in untapped. And if you wanted to upgrade your bicycle land, you could do Overgrown Tomb, the shock land. We've got 2 filter lands. Viridescent Bog is the same as our Golgari Signet, but on a land. It's untapped. It taps for black and green, but it requires us to pay a mana into it. So it's not actually making more than, 1 mana overall, since it costs 1 to activate, but pretty nice for us to be able to filter and get our colors. So that's the Viridescent Bog. We also have Twilight Mire. This is a land that comes in untapped and just taps for colorless. We can also pay a black or green into it and tap it, and make 2 black, 2 green, or 1 of each. So taps for mana on its own, whereas the Bog does not, and it can fix our mana for 1 of each, but also give us 2 of 1 if we need to. So Twilight Mire is very good. It's not strictly better. Almost, but not strictly better than the Bog, because notably, the Twilight Mire can make colorless mana, but it cannot make colored mana at all unless we have colored mana to put into it. Whereas the Bog can make colored mana as long as we have any mana to put into it. So both are very useful in our deck, and so we're running both. Might as well. We're running 4 fixing lands. Of course we're running Command Tower. It is an untapped land that adds 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. That's just Arcane Signet's text. So this is a land, comes in untapped, it makes black and green, works for us. Similarly, we're running Path of Ancestry, which is a land that comes in tapped, but has the same line of text again. So it's like a tapped Command Tower. But it's better in a different way, because when we use its mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry 1. So we get a free scry every time we use this mana to cast a creature spell that is a Phyrexian. That includes our commander themselves. So we've got more than 20 cards in the deck that this is going to give us a scry off of, and otherwise it's a tapped dual land, and that's just fine. We're running Myriad Landscape. It comes in tapped and taps for colorless, and we can pay it 2, tap, and sack it to search our library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type. So in this deck, 2 basic swamps or 2 basic forests. Then we put them on the battlefield tapped and we shuffle. So even though this is coming in tapped, it requires us to pay mana into it to sack it, and the lands it finds come in tapped. That's a lot of slowness, but it is 1 land drop that we're turning into 2 lands that tap for colored mana for us. So it is slow acceleration. Worth having. If you wanted to do a different take on this, you could run Blighted Woodland. It does not come in tapped, but it requires 4 mana and tap and sacrifice to go find 2 basics. They don't have to share a land type though. So Blighted Woodland doesn't accelerate as soon, but it does tap for mana a turn sooner, so yeah, either way. And Temple of the False God. I know not everyone likes this land, but I think it's great, especially for the budget of decks that I build. It's an untapped land that taps for 2 colorless mana, like a Soul Ring. This is a soul land, except you can't activate its mana ability unless you control 4 or more other lands, so 5 or more lands including itself. So while this is not ideal if it's in your opening hand, like if you have an opening hand with a swamp and a Temple of the False God and no other lands, yeah, probably mulligan that. But if you get this out on turn 4 or 5, especially if you've accelerated before turn 4, this is going to give you more mana than the land drop it costs for you to put it into play, and that's acceleration. Very nice. We've got several more lands. We've got 1 Pain land. This is Llanowar Wastes. It is the same as that talisman that we saw earlier. It taps for colorless, or we can have it do a damage to us to have it tap for black or green. Totally fine. Everything I said about the talisman is true again. You know, we'll use it for the black or green if we need to, otherwise we'll just use it for this, and it's worth the damage that we take. I really like the pathways, so here's Darkboar Pathway. It's a land that comes in untapped and taps for black. Or we can play it on its backside as Slitherboar Pathway, and it comes in untapped and it taps for green. Whatever we need it to be in that moment, we've got it. Here it is. So this is a very solid land. It's very flexible for us. It is also about $4. So a little more expensive than some of our other lands. But if we're doing like Llanowar Wastes and we wanted to upgrade this to like a shock land, that's going to be a lot more money too. So it's just a matter of how consistent do you want your deck to be versus how much do you want to spend on it. So, similarly true is for Temple of Malady. This is a land that is always tapped, but it taps for black or green, and when it comes in, we scry one. So not as much of a scry, or not as frequent scrying as we would get with Path of Ancestry, as a tapped land that makes our 2 colors, but a guaranteed one when it first comes in. And if we wanted to upgrade this, you could certainly go to the Underground Mortuary Surveil land for a lot more money. Last of these types of lands, we have Vernal Fen. This is a tango land. It is a swamp and a forest, just like the bicycle land that we saw earlier, so it innately taps for black or green, and we can fetch it with Farseek. And it also counts as a swamp and a forest for our check land. And it enters tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. So if we have 2 basic lands in play, Vernal Fen comes in as an untapped duel. Very nice. Last of our lands is we have these 5 utility lands. I like to run 1 answer to an opponent's land base. I know that land destruction is usually frowned upon at the kind of commander tables who would play a deck of the level of decks that I build, but you have to have 1 answer for the Voltron player playing Rogue's Passage to make their commander unblockable, or the control player who has Mazavith, who's stopping people from attacking with their big creatures. Anything that would stop you from accomplishing your game plan, or that empowers their game plan too much in their land base, it's fine to have just 1 answer for it. So here is our 1 answer. It's Demolition Field. It comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to destroy a non-basic land that an opponent controls. And then that land's controller gets to search their library for a basic, put it on the battlefield untapped, and shuffle. And so do we. So neither they nor we are down a land, assuming we had basics left in our library, and we've dealt with something problematic at the table that was in their land base. Otherwise, we just don't mess with the other people's lands. It's fine. Fountain Port is next. This is a utility land for us that does a lot of things, but it's mostly in here for its second ability. So it comes in untapped, and it taps for colorless, and that's fine. We can also pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice a token to draw a card. So any of those incubator tokens that Glissa's making, we can pay to tap and sack it to just turn those into carded draw if we need to. If we want, we can pay 3 and tap it and pay a life to make a 1/1 blue fish creature token. If we need fish, we can make a fish. It's a fine surprise blocker, I guess. And if we've got a bunch of extra mana lying around, sure, let's bank it in the form of paying 4 and tapping and making a treasure token. Usually we've got this here for our cards, but this is a $5 land right now, and you could definitely cut it from the deck and make it this already reasonable budget into much cheaper, just with that Fountain Pour cut. Karn's Bastion is next. It comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay 4 and tap it to proliferate. So this is just Contagion Clasp on a land, except it doesn't give something a -1/-1 counter when it comes in. Mirrex is next. This is a land sphere, because it's Phyrexia, that taps for colorless, or you can tap it for 1 mana of any color, only if it entered this turn. So you hold this in hand until you need a specific color, if you want to do it that way, and you can get that color just the once. We can also pay 3 into it and tap it to make a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1 that cannot block. So 1 more Phyrexian for us. Even though it's an artifact creature, it is a Phyrexian, and it has Toxic and helps us out. Plus we can sacrifice these to something like Fountain Port. Pretty good. And I mentioned Rogue's Passage before. We've got a couple of big creatures, or creatures that have a lot of toxic ability. Sometimes it's worth it to just make them unblockable. So Rogue's Passage does that for us. We can tap it for colorless, it does come in untapped, or we can pay 4 and tap it to make a creature unblockable this turn. We can use this politically too if we really want to. We can say to opponent A, look, I know you want to attack opponent B, but you can't get through their board. I will make your creature unblockable if you give me something in return, if you leave me alone for the next 2 rounds of the game or whatever. And they'll say, great, go ahead and activate your Rogue's Passage. And we'll say, no, you have to attack with the creature first, otherwise I could make your creature unblockable, and then I wouldn't be able to block it either if you choose to betray me and attack me. And they'll say, okay, that's fair. If I'm going to trust you, you got to trust me too. I'll go ahead and declare as an attacker this creature. And then you say, great, I'm an honorable player. I will activate my Rogue's Passage before blockers and make your attacking creature unblockable. And now you've made a friend for life, because that's how Magic works. But in any case, this Rogue's Passage is mostly here to help us, but we sure could use it politically, and people should play more politically. It's a lot of fun. And that sums it up. Again, I'm making a deck for each of the March of the Machine legends, so let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a specific commander or deck style. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe. Remember to ring that bell so you can be notified whenever I post one of my decks. And most of all, remember that Magic is fun. You should play more Magic.